Hello and welcome to SRIRAM IAS. In this lecture series, we know that we are discussing the book by SRIRAM sir. In this book, we are going chapter to chapter, and particularly till now, we have completed 8 chapters. And today's topic will be fiscal policy. Very simple. Now, before we start the topic, as we have this tradition over here, the tradition is very simple, that I will tell you a story, which is a story of, say, one economist. And today, I'll be telling you about Alfred Marshall. Alfred Marshall says that agar kabhi bhi, if at any case we face a recession or we face a slowdown in economy, maybe it might be because either of supply or demand. But he says that he is also one of the classicals like Adam Smith. As Adam Smith said that the forces of demand and supply will correct each other. The producers and consumers will function rationally. He calls man as an economically thinking rational man. That was what Adam Smith gave us the argument about. But Alfred Marshall says that you know what? The forces of demand and supply, and to identify which one is affecting in the market. Is it the recession is because of demand or supply? In order to find out this, it is as difficult as to find out that which blade of a scissor is cutting the paper. So whenever you start cutting a paper with a scissor, you never know which blade is actually cutting the paper. Is it the blade on the downside or the blade on the upside? Why? Why did Alfred Marshall pose us such a comment? Because he says, just imagine a situation or just figure out that when we see, say for example during COVID-19, we witnessed that most of the plants, most of the factories, they faced restrictions by the government. And all of them started, I would say, stopped working. There was massive employee layoff. Once the employees went home, the machinery stopped. Now, this was a short-term measure, or I would say a short-term economic lockdown. Now, think in such a manner that these employees, once they go home, they may find their resolve, or they may find now solitude with their agriculture. They will never come back. Some of the employees will never come back. Also, the machinery which was led to rest may now rust. So therefore, this machinery will stop producing. Not only this, there will be more such thing due to which this short-term decrease in demand. Why companies stopped production? Why did they stop production? There were two reasons. One was lockdown, another was there was less demand in the market. Why was there less demand in the market? Because it was a period of pandemic, a period of instability and chaos. Due to this period, what happened? What happened in this period? People now had negative sentiment towards the market, that we should save more rather than consuming more. When they started saving more, so the marginal propensity to consume will decrease. When the marginal propensity to consume will decrease, therefore the demand in the market will decrease. When the demand in the market will decrease for the short term, it means it will have impact on the producers also. So the producers which laid off their employees, which stopped functioning, which stopped production of their machinery due to this short-term slump in the demand. Now once this short-term slump converts itself into decrease in production, this production has now more intensity and more vulnerability to become a long-term recession. Why? As I said, that some employees may find their resolve with the agriculture, some machinery needs to be replaced now. Most of the employees now may need new skills for the new machinery which is being brought in. It might be difficult for the entrepreneurs to keep up with the interest payments which they had to pay. So therefore, it is pertinent for a government to act promptly whenever this sort of situation arises. Because जब भी कभी ऐसा होगा, it will lead to what? It will lead to a long-term recession, and once that long-term recession hits, the economy goes into depression. And post-depression, there are some structural measures, there are some cyclicist measures which we need to which we need to adopt to, and it is more difficult. It is more difficult to bring economy back from the depression. Particularly when it is a double dip depression, it will be more difficult. So therefore, why do I narrate this story? Because there is not only Alfred Marshall, but there is one more columnist who was back then writing in New York Times. His name is David Brooks. He also talks about the measures which government takes in fiscal policy. David Brooks, he talks about those people who are following Keynesian methods, that is those people who believe in Keynesian methodology of economics, that is we need to focus on demand side, we need to increase the demand. These are cyclicists. And those people who believe that we need to change the structure of the economy, we need to check that where is the fault in the economy, is it in the lockdown and we need to ease the restrictions, or is it because there was slump in production? We need to increase the employment. So therefore, there are two people who are working in the economy. One is cyclicists, another is structuralists. But both of them pose a question to government that what should government bring into the platter in terms of budget, in terms of fiscal policy for the economy, so that economy will start now reviving itself. So these are the questions of fiscal policy, and with these questions we will begin our lecture today. Maybe it might have been a bit overwhelming for all of you, but yes, I believe that you will learn it eventually. So therefore, let's understand what is fiscal policy. Agar kuch samajh mein na aaye, you just have to do one thing. You have to comment in the comment section that we didn't understood this concept. Please repeat this concept. In the next lecture, it will be repeated. You already have my contact details, all of you. You can directly ping me over here. You can directly scan these QR codes for whatever reason has been mentioned over here. There are QR codes mentioned over here for PYQ marathon of 2015 to 2025. All the PYQs for static economy marathon, you can watch this. And for these notes, you can ping me. These are the notes from 6th to 12th class. All the notes are there. Understood? Chalo. So it is understanding how the governments manage money to drive growth, equity and sustainability through strategic financial decision making. Do you understand why I mentioned about David Brooks and Alfred Marshall? Was because we need to understand that what is government gonna do when it comes to growth, economic stimulus and much more things. So therefore, the foundation of fiscal policy is simple, that government will provide some of the financing, government will do financial planning. Financial planning, it will see that how, do you remember? Do you remember the question, or I would say the concept of circular flow of money? In the circular flow, we had households and firms which were working in the closed loop, and with this we had financial institutions, we had government, and we have exports and imports, or I would call it external sector. Now do you remember that whenever government imposes taxes and whenever government gives subsidies, both the things, they are either what? They are either leakages or they are injections to this circular flow of economy. Now understand, government has to plan these leakages, government has to plan these injections. Whenever government takes a loan, from outside, say it is external borrowing or it is internal borrowing, whenever government borrows from anywhere, what will government do with this borrowing? It will directly increase the consumption. It will directly increase the consumption, C plus G plus I. Government will invest it. So therefore it will increase what? Investment. Maybe gross capital formation will increase. Maybe government will increase its consumption. So that is how government needs to plan its fiscal policy. Not only here leakages, not only injections, but also the borrowings, investments, and when to do what. Do you remember that I also told you one more thing, that it is suggested by economists that government should keep some of the projects ready. Say for example, we made a project, a detailed project report, DPR is ready, that we need to start say for example, we need to start an infrastructural project, say a hospital of 5,000 beds in one of the areas, say one of the areas of Delhi, say Jangpura. We need to start constructing this hospital. Now this project is ready. When is the right time to start this project? It is when the economy is already down. Why? Because at that point of time, it will help us in two things. One is the project will be built and the economic recovery will happen. So therefore, government's fiscal policy has to be designed and formulated in such a manner. Next, we need to understand that the core component is that how government will ensure its revenues and how it will ensure that all of the expenditure which government is doing is being done with prudence. It has to ensure fiscal prudence. That is what is mentioned over here. That is all the tax expenditure, all the infrastructural investment, or whatever government is doing, whether it is taxes, borrowings, if it is imposing taxes, those taxes should be utilized properly for infrastructural projects, not for the daily revenue or daily expenditure. Now, these concepts we will read in the upcoming slides. So therefore, fiscal policy and its goals are very simple. First is we need to ensure economic objectives, that is growth, equity, long-term sustainability and export promotion. Second, social promotions as in gender empowerment, and you will see India started gender budgeting. Why do we start gender budgeting? Why do we do gender budgeting? Because gender empowerment, small scale industry support. This year 2026 budget mentions about small and medium enterprises fund which will be created. It also mentions about not only small, medium MSMEs, but also about new crops, say for example coconut, fish industry or fishing. These will be promoted more. Makhana was on, I would say, a watch list of government from past 3-4 budgets, so that the industry related to makhana, turmeric, coconut, fishing increases and grows. Agricultural encouragement and infrastructural development, new age projects, national infrastructural pipeline projects. Also Gadkari ji, who is totally to revolutionize the mobilization, or I would say mobility sector in India. That is how it is being planned under fiscal policy. So therefore, where does the government's money come from? Where is actually government sourcing its revenues from? First is by directly imposing taxes, by having non-tax revenues. Now what are non-tax revenues? Tax revenue is simple. Either government imposes GST on this remote, or government does one more thing, that they will have a PSU which is making these remotes and then selling these remotes in the market, earning profit, and then that is the dividend, or that is non-tax revenue for government. So therefore, all the profit, all the dividend, all the interest payments which government is receiving, say government gave a loan to state government, central government gave a loan to state government on 10% interest rate. Now that interest is somehow what? Non-tax revenue for central government. Similarly, user charges, say you used electricity, you used tap water, on that you have to pay a minimal fees, say 2,000, 1,000, 500, 300 rupees monthly. That are user charges which government charges, and that is a revenue for government. Asset monetization, government somehow does two things. Either government has a private, I would say a PSU, government sells it off. Disinvestment, government sells it off, it will have revenue, it will gain something. Say for example, I have this mobile phone, if I want, I can sell it. Once I sell it, I will get some money. That is what government does when it sells the mobile phone manufacturing company which it had on its own, which was a PSU. When government sells LIC, when government sells Coal India, when government sells multiple other PSUs. Disinvestment, or what government can do is, government can lease a highway. Say government built a highway and then it leased it to someone or transferred it to someone. built, operate and transfer. Government gave it to some private entity and told them, okay, you can collect tolls on this highway for next say 20 years, 30 years or 1 year or 2 years. Now pay us a lump sum amount of 2 crore, 3 crore, 10 crore rupees. That is asset monetization, because it was an asset of the government, it monetized it. Last thing is borrowings. Government can borrow internally or externally to source its finances. Understood? The borrowing part is more important because we will be discussing it in detail. Now, union government receipts in 25-26, that how government actually received its money. You need to remember that where rupee comes from, where rupee goes. This is from the 2026 budget. This figure is mentioned, or this data is mentioned in your book, but this data is not mentioned in the book. This is the latest data, that is 2026 data. So remember some of the most, I would say, highest shares. The highest share of revenue is from borrowings, second comes income tax, and third is corporation tax, and the fourth one is GST and other taxes. 4. Similarly, rupee goes to the most is state share, that is the revenue which is given to states. Second is interest payments. Third is central sector schemes. And fourth is centrally sponsored schemes, I think. No, it is defense. Fourth is defense. Then comes centrally sponsored schemes. That finance commission and other transfers, subsidies, and then the rest. Now remember these two graphs as it is all the things which I marked over here. Remember them because that is what UPSC usually asks. So how government spends, these are the figures which are mentioned in the book, but these are the figures which you should remember. Done? Next, revenue and capital account. So whenever we talk about budget, what is budget per se? Budget is annual financial statement. It is mentioned in Article 112 of our Constitution. Now budget is what? Budget is the, I would say, a document which summarizes all the expenditure, all the revenue of government for next one financial year. Now what actually is being pursued by introducing or by formulating this budget? Now remember one thing, that we will be entirely covering budget. Totally we will be covering budget one by one, bit by bit, but in the next lecture, not today. Today I am just introducing it and some concepts which we need to understand before we understand budget. Those concepts I will make sure that you understand them. That is what we are discussing today. So therefore, budget is a document which summarizes all the income and all the expenditure of government. So when we talk about income of government, this income can be of two types. Simple, this income can be of two types. Say the first type of income is, I imposed a tax on you. Now you paid that tax, that is something called as a revenue receipt. That I received it and it is my revenue. Second is, I had a PSU, say a company, government had a PSU. It was manufacturing these mouse. Simple, government had a mouse making PSU, or I would say government had HPCL, Hindustan Petroleum Corporation Limited. Government sold off some of its shares. Government went on and started an IPO of say 20% of the shares of this HPCL. Once people started subscribing to those shares, people purchased those shares. Now 20% of this HPCL has been privatized. Do you understand? Government received a revenue from here. Now what is this revenue? This is capital receipt. Or government did one more thing. Government asked someone to borrow me something. Say for example, government generated a loan. Government asked, our central government asked, Indian government asked the Japan's government that please sanction us a loan of $1 billion. And Japanese government gave us that loan. Now what is this? This is also capital receipt. Why? Because this is something which we have to pay off. It is a liability on us. Do you understand? So capital is what? Either it increases the asset liabilities or decreases the assets. Remember, capital receipt is what? Capital receipt is what? Either it increases the liability or it decreases the assets. So therefore, budget has two accounts. One is revenue account, another is capital account. Simple. Revenue account mentions about two things. One is revenue receipt and revenue expenditure. What is revenue expenditure? Say for example, government gave salaries to the government employees. That is revenue expenditure. What is capital expenditure? Say government build capital. Government purchased a machine which will be helpful to produce, say, these remotes. Now this is a capital investment. Government started to build a road, this is a capital investment. Government started to build, say for example, an HEP, that is a capital investment. Understood? That is capital expenditure. Simple. So capital account has receipts and expenditure, capital receipts and capital expenditure. Revenue account has the revenue receipts and revenue expenditure. Very simple. Understand this and make sure that you also make some notes out of this. Government's capital receipts and revenue receipts, government's expenditure, effective capital expenditure, we will discuss about this, and revenue expenditure. Why there is effective capital expenditure, I will tell you this also. Now, first of all, capital expenditure. If you see, this has been increasing and the projected part is that it will be around 18.1 lakh crore for 26-27. This is budgetary estimate for next year. 26-27 financial year, this year which is running. Second, revenue receipts. It means what? The government's disinvestment is increasing. Government's loan generating capacity, government is borrowing more money. Revenue receipts. Revenue receipts means how much revenue is government collecting. What is that? Revenue receipt. What is revenue receipt? Tax plus non-tax profits, dividends and interests. Simple. Chalo. Revenue receipts. It is also increasing, sometimes decreasing. This is also sometimes increasing, sometimes decreasing. Remember the graph and do not confuse yourself that it is continuously increasing or continuously decreasing. Simple. But the estimates are for 3 years only. 24-25, 25-26, 25-26 revised. And then 26-27. So it is 1, 2 and 3 financial years. Simple. These are estimates and these are revised for the past year. 25-26, which was back then running when the budget was introduced on February, 1st February. That is why this is estimate which was back then on 1st February of 2020-25. Now this is the revised estimates which were back then on 1st February of 2026. Understood? Simple. So therefore, revenue receipts of the government will also increase up to 35.3 lakh crores. This year budget mentions 18.1 and 35.5 lakh crores for capital receipts and revenue receipts. Similarly, when you talk about revenue expenditure, this is also in the same sync. And revenue expenditure is how much? 41.3 lakh crores. Revenue receipt is how much? 35.3 lakh crores. Revenue expenditure is this much. So, don't you think that the receipts are less than the expenditure? And when receipts are less than the expenditure, it means what? That my income is less than my expenditure. When my income is less than my expenditure, what am I going to do? There is revenue deficit. There is clearly a revenue deficit over here between the two. So whenever there is revenue deficit between the two, what will I do? What does this actually mean? It means that my daily expenditure, my daily expenditure, my day-to-day expenditure is more than what is my income. It means I am borrowing money or I am selling off my assets just to make sure that I survive the day. इसका मतलब ये होता है आमदनी अठनी खर्चा रुपया. Understood? चलो. Next is effective capital expenditure. So government this year mentioned this term effective capital expenditure in the budget itself. What does this mean, effective capital expenditure? Very simple term. It means that the capital expenditure minus non-debt creating grants, or I would say these are those grants which are given for capital creation. Grants minus grants for capital creation. Understood? So why will government mention about grants which are given for capital creation, and what is the difference between capital expenditure and effective capital expenditure? Capital expenditure is very simple, that you mentioned about, or you gave, say for example you spent money for creation of capital assets, whatever it was, say it was loans to states, PSUs, infrastructure creation loans and repayments. But then again there was one more thing, that you gave a grant to state. Now this grant is something which is an expenditure of the government, which is actually a revenue expenditure of the government, because it mentions grants. It mentions grants. Grants, because grants do not create fiscal assets, but we are giving grants to states for creation of capital assets. So these grants should be mentioned under what? Capital expenditure. So therefore capital expenditure includes, effective capital expenditure includes the grants which are given for capital creation. Understood? Therefore effective capex comprises union government's capital spendings plus the grants which are given to states for capital creation. Do you understand? So therefore unlike the current expenditure which is covering salaries, effective capital expenditure will focus on long-term development. Understood? So 25-26 budget mentions that effective capital expenditure should be 4.3% of GDP, and we have currently an effective capital expenditure budgetary estimate of 17.1 lakh crores. Simple? Chalo, done. That is it about the government's expenditure. Now we will understand that what happens when government's income is less than expenditure. Now this income, or I would say receipts, these receipts can be of two types, say they can be of capital or revenue nature. Similarly expenditure we also mentioned, it can be capital expenditure or revenue expenditure. Simple. So therefore whenever the capital receipts are less than capital expenditure, so we are facing a capital budget, or whenever the revenue receipts are less than the revenue expenditure, we are facing a revenue deficit. Simple. But whenever the total income is less than the total expenditure, we are facing a budgetary deficit. Whole budget is under deficit. So what does this term deficit mean? Deficit means that you have a lack of resources. You are lacking this much money when it comes to the question of expenditure which you are planning to do. So therefore the money which you lack, you need to either borrow it from somewhere or sell your gold which is lying at your I would say treasury. वैसी बात है, अगर घर पे कोई आफत आ जाए तो जो घर पे एसेट पड़ा होता है, चाहे वो गाड़ी हो, कोई सोना हो, बेच दिया जाता है. That is what government does. What are the types of deficits? First is revenue deficit, which we mentioned. It is the gap between revenue receipts and revenue expenditure. Fiscal deficit, it is the total expenditure minus total receipts. Total expenditure minus total receipts equals to fiscal deficit or budget deficit, we call it. Simple. All the government borrowings in a year. Remember always, fiscal deficit means total borrowings. If you understand this one point, that fiscal deficit equals to the total borrowings of the government, if you understand this one point and remember this one point, easily a student could have solved two questions in 25, 26 also. Primary deficit means what? It means that all the borrowings which you did, that is fiscal deficit. All the borrowings which you did, that is fiscal deficit, minus the interest payments. What are interest payments? Interest payments are very simple thing. We borrowed loan. We borrowed money from Japan, China or any other nation, say USA, Britain, anywhere we borrowed money. Now this money was borrowed, this loan was taken years back. This was taken 5 years, 10 years, 20 years back. We still are paying interest of that loan. So therefore, what is our actual borrowing? Say 10 crore rupees. But what is our interest payment which is going every year? Say 1 crore rupee. So therefore, primary deficit is 10 crores. Fiscal deficit is 11 crores. Primary deficit is 10 crores. Interest payment is 1 crore. Simple. Next, revenue deficit. What is revenue deficit? Total revenue expenditure minus total revenue receipts. That is what I mentioned over here. Revenue receipts minus revenue expenditure. That is revenue deficit. Simple. So when the revenue deficit is 0, government can fund the consumption from its own resources. Do you remember this slide? Where I said that revenue receipts are very less than, far less than revenue expenditure of the government. It means government is earning 35 lakh crores and government is spending 41 lakh crore rupees. It means there is a net, or I would say a gross amount of 6 lakh crore rupees which government needs just to function itself, just to keep on functioning, just to pay salaries of the employees, just to make sure that there is enough food available with the government, just to pay, I would say, for the samosa party and Netaji's car ka fuel. That is what this 6 lakh crore rupees is all about. So therefore, there is a problem with this revenue deficit. What is the problem? That whenever there is revenue deficit, we need to make sure that there are provisions created out of capital budget, which will now fulfill the revenue deficit. And that is a problem for the government, which means that you are earning, say, 10,000 rupees per month and you are spending 20,000 rupees per month. Now, your father sends you 20,000 rupees or 10,000 rupees per month for your PG and you start spending 20,000 rupees every month. What will happen? After 1 or 2 months or 3 months or 4 months, when all of your friends will stop giving you money to spend, then you will see that you will be all in debt and you will be lost and you will have no other source but to sell your laptop, to sell your phone and to pay off your debt. That is what happens when the revenue deficit is actually looming upwards. Therefore, we brought in the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act 2003. Under this act, government is now forced and government is now complied. Government must ensure that there is a zero revenue deficit. But the target has never been achieved and has been dropped. ठीक है? तो achieve भी नहीं हुआ, so we said that okay, it is better to drop the target. This is a critical issue because without targeting the zero revenue deficit and all borrowings could be potentially used for consumption rather than asset creation. Next is effective revenue deficit. This revenue deficit which we discussed over here, this revenue deficit includes what? This revenue deficit includes all the grants which are given to states for capital creation. So therefore, effective revenue deficit includes what? It was introduced in FRBM Act 2012. This was 2003. 2012 mein we amended the act and said that to protect the revenue deficit portions that create capital assets, because we are giving grants to states so that they create capital assets, which means that that is not actually the revenue expenditure. We are creating capital in the states. Although it is a grant given to state, but this capital will generate benefits, will increase the GDP of the nation. It will increase the income generating capacity of states. Once that happens, it means the effect after 2, 3, 4 or 10 years or 20 years will be massive. So therefore, we should remove those, we should remove that part from the revenue deficit. So revenue deficit minus capital creating grants equals to effective revenue deficit. Simple. Revenue deficit equals to revenue deficit minus grants for capital creation. Understood? Done. So deficit trends in India. Fiscal deficit, if you watch clearly, has been decreasing, and the target, currently we have a fiscal deficit of say for 26-27, 26-27 it is 4.3% target. Simple. Revenue deficit, the target is 1.5. Primary deficit target is 0.7 and effective revenue deficit target is 0.3. Simple. It is actually percentage of GDP. That is the targets which are mentioned in budget 2026. 4. So therefore, remember one thing, fiscal deficit, when we talk about 22-23, it was 6.5. Why did this happen? Because we had to borrow a lot. It was not just 6.5%, but it earlier was 9.5. Why? Because of the pandemic and a lot of borrowings post-pandemic. Now from 6.5, we have a target to decrease it to 4.3, but actual FRBM Act mentions 3%. Understood? Yet to be achieved. Rest of the things we already discussed. So fiscal deficit is the key metrics to define that is government's fiscal policy prudent enough. Is government's fiscal policy actually going to work? Is government's fiscal policy, which the government is targeting that our fiscal deficit should be around 4.5% by 25-26, 4.5%, but currently we have a target for next year. 4.5% was the target for 25-26. It was the target for 25-26. Currently our target is 4.3%. Remember this. Understood? Done? Gross versus net fiscal deficit, we already mentioned it. Net fiscal deficit is when you see government borrows for the states who may not create credit worthy minus loan recoveries. Government already has fiscal deficit minus all the loan recoveries. So therefore net fiscal deficit is gross fiscal deficit minus net lending of the government, which government has lent, the loans which government created. So actual borrowings minus loans created. Primary deficit, we already discussed it. Fiscal deficit, interest payments, primary deficit. Why I mentioned this figure? This is actual the budget figure from 25-26. It is mentioned in your book also because UPSC asked a question of numericals in I would say 25 prelims. UPSC mentioned about that, find out the fiscal deficit, find out the primary deficit, find out the revenue deficit, and it gave some numbers in those numericals. So therefore you just need to understand that fiscal deficit minus interest payments equals to primary deficit. Remember the formula. Understood? Monetized deficit is one more term. Monetized deficit means when RBI gives money or lends money to government. Now instead of paying back the money to RBI, government asks RBI to print the currency or print that much of money. So therefore government already spent that money and now RBI is printing that money back again and selling it back into the I would say market. Therefore this will increase the money supply twice. Once government supplied that money and RBI is also supplying that money, it means the money supply will increase massively, due to which inflation will increase. So therefore FRBM Act mentions, under FRBM Act this was discontinued, this process was discontinued itself because government used to do this quite often and this process had to stop. Understood? So what is the role of deficit financing? It is quite critical because if you see in 1950s, the challenge was that domestic saving ratio was less than 9% of GDP. So due to this challenge, government was constrained with investment. We had very less investment. So therefore there were very limited options available to raise the capital and to raise the economy or to raise the investment rate. The first option was that should have been non-inflationary in nature, because raising taxes, savings or market borrowings was highly limited. Because at that point of time people didn't have that much of resources. So we start borrowing, internal borrowing, that too was limited. And due to this effect, there might have been an effect of crowding out risk. And whenever crowding out happens in the market, what is crowding out? It's a very simple concept. Crowding out is actually about that, see, in the market there is very limited money which is available. In the market there is very limited money which is available. Now either I can borrow it or government can borrow it. Do you understand? Say, we mentioned about this cycle and we mentioned about circular flow of money. These financial institutions where I was doing savings and I made my savings into banks. Now these banks will give loans, and this loan can be either pursued after, or this loan can be given either to a private player or government. Whenever government starts to borrow more, it means the investment which was going to be into private sector, that is into this cycle, is now going through where? Financial institutions to say government, and from government it will come back to this cycle. Now this will take time, because otherwise this investment was to be directly injected into this, and whenever the investment will directly come into this, the production will increase more than this methodology. So there will be less money which will be left for private sector under crowding out. Do you understand? So therefore crowding out is very simple. Crowding out means that government borrowings from the market would crowd out the resources for business and consumptions. Do you understand? Simple. So the solution was deficit financing. Deficit financing was done by government. Deficit financing means monetization of the deficit. Understood? That is printing currency in terms of, or when we create a deficit, we print the money for that deficit. So therefore, debt is more better than creating a deficit. Fiscal deficit is the annual amount public debt which is accumulated historically from the domestic and external sources, that is public debt. Deficit is annual amount or public debt. However, when we talk about benefits within the limits, or I would say when we talk about this deficit financing, there are benefits. Say for example, we generate or we have more resources, and whenever we have more resources in terms of loans, we can later on pay off those loans whenever we have growth. Further, there are risks associated to fiscal deficit, because whenever you go for excessive deficit financing, this may trigger a sovereign debt crisis, and whenever sovereign debt crisis happens, then I would say the nation, the credit or sovereign credit ratings of that nation fall down. Now I will give you a classic example of this. Last year 2025 prelims, UPSC asked a question, or 24, UPSC asked a question that what will happen if US government, stopped, or I would say asked all the treasury bond holders, all those people who hold treasury bonds of USA government, they will tell them or reply to them that we cannot pay these treasury bonds. Now what will happen? Just imagine the scenario that you hold a government security of Indian government. You went on to purchase government securities because you do not trust in banks, you do not trust in any other financial institution. So you went to borrow or purchase government securities. Why are you purchasing government securities, or why are you investing in government securities? Because you believe that government will never deny you the money, because it is the sovereign. Government has that, I would say, faith of people into it. But when government denies this money, what does that mean? That government does not have enough resources to pay off even its debt. And that is what creates problem. That is what creates problem to the credit worthiness of that country. Do you understand? Therefore, what are the consequences of excessive deficit? First was that credit ratings will decrease, and it will also impact the forex reserves. Understood? Further, it also creates an intergenerational equity, because next generation, we too can create a debt. We can borrow loans, and infinite loans. We borrow, say for example, billions and trillions of loan, but that has to be repaid by the future generation. So you are creating an intergenerational debt, and that is why world today is, if you say the net GDP or gross domestic product, or I would say GDP of the world is say $1 trillion, the debt of the world is $3 trillion. That is what the earth has created for itself. That is what the countries have created for itself by just debt financing and raising the debts, raising the public debt. Development may squeeze if you do not, invest, if you do not purchase, I would say borrow loans. There may be consequences of that. Say for example, if India lately in 1991, if we suppose that India never went for reforms, India never asked IMF or any other international institution to give us loans. If India would have gone for that policy, was it possible for India to have its own resources and to fulfill all the aspirations of all the citizens of India? That was very much difficult. We might not have had this much of development which we have currently. Understood? So government liability and interest payments may increase, leaving far less money for the developmental programs. External pressures may increase because balance of payment pressure mounts the inflow if the inflow drops due to credit rating downgrades by agencies like S&P and Moody and Fitch. So therefore, whenever a country loses its credit worthiness, whenever, it's a very simple thing. Say for example, your credit score gets eroded. You last time had a loan or you borrowed a loan, say of 10 lakh rupees, and you never paid the EMIs, which means what? Your credit score has gone now. It has eroded at all. Now what will happen? If you ask any other government, any other agency for one more loan, they will not give you that loan. Why will they not give you that loan? Because they know that you already are a defaulter. That is what happens to governments. And when that happens to governments, no other country will give you loans. If Japan was the one which gave you loan earlier, now no one is going to give you loans, because there are some credit rating agencies like Brickwork Ratings, S&P, Moody, Fitch. They will score the countries, they will rate the countries just like your credit score. That okay, now you cannot give the, now this country has a track record that it never pays off, so therefore don't lend to them. Do you understand? That was all about deficit financing and why deficits are actually important, because when crisis happens, whenever the crisis happens, deficits are actually important. So it is said that whenever there is a boom in economy, you must act like a hard winger, and whenever there is a recession in economy, you must act like a left winger. Understood? A heart bleeding left winger. So therefore, you can understand it. If you do not, then I will be telling you it later someday, some other day. Understood? So that was all about deficit. And what is twin deficit? Twin deficit is a challenge. Twin deficit is a challenge when you have budget deficit also, your currency is also weakening, you spend more and government spending exceeds the revenue. The currency weakens. You have both budget deficit also and current account deficit also. You have deficit at two places. One is budgetary deficit and current account deficit also. So due to this, what will happen? The investors will start taking their money out of the country. Imports will start increasing because current account deficit is already there. Inflation, you will bring in what? Imported inflation. Because you have current account deficit, it means you are paying more in terms of imports, and therefore government has to spend more and more. So government subsidizes to combat the inflation, and when government subsidizes to combat the inflation, what will happen? Government will face more deficit. Do you understand? So there is a challenge, and whenever this twin deficit happens, there is too much of difficult of a situation to come out of this. Understood? So at this point of time, government should give an economic stimulus to the economy, and that is what government does when it comes to recession, when it comes to, I would say, a challenging factor, when it comes to a slump in the economy. That is where government should act promptly. But hereby we are stopping over here, and we will understand in the next lecture that why does government actually need to give stimulus. Whenever government gives the stimulus, how will it impact the economy, and when it starts impacting the economy, how much time will it take? understood how will it impact the demand side and the supply side of the economy. Now, I'll stop over here. I thank you all for being here and I wish you all the best for your journey ahead and a good day ahead. If you have any doubts regarding your preparation, regarding anything in this lecture or any other lecture, you can ask directly. You have my contact details. You can ask in the comment section. Your doubts are more than welcome. Now, I wish you all the best. Thank you once again. Jai Hind.